Welcome to The Economy magazine at I-24 News, where we give you a daily view on global business and innovation. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Well, coming up today, a hub of cyber innovation emerges in Israel's desert, and wine producers in the UK add new fizz to British bubbly. Let's start now with the headlines. We start in Greece, where the Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has now called on voters to choose no in a referendum this Sunday to decide whether to reject the possibility of an international bailout deal. Less than a day now after writing an appeasing letter to creditors, the Prime Minister seemed defiant in a televised address. The referendum's outcome will determine whether Greece will have public support in taking a deal with more austerity measures. After some speculation that Tsipras might call off the referendum, he suggested that Greece was being blackmailed, while onlookers have no sense of where things may end up as Athens and its lenders are locked in a series of combative statements and negotiation pitches.
Personally, I never expected democratic Europe not to understand the need to give time and space to the people to decide on their future. But the prevalence of extreme conservative circles have suffocated the country's banks, and it is obvious their goal is to transfer the blackmail of the government onto every single citizen.
Meanwhile, Chinese markets, which have tumbled recently, saw another tough day. Shanghai stocks dropped more than 3% in afternoon trading, down more than 25% since a June 12th high, despite an interest rate cut over the weekend. Globally, investors are cautious but not totally shaken in the wake of the Greek thriller taking place these days after it defaulted on a $1.7 billion payment to the IMF. Well, jobs growth in the United States will probably see a cool down after June saw a 5-month high. There are indications that the labor market is strong enough these days to support a September interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve. Estimates show non-farm payrolls increased 230,000 after a 280,000 rise in May, according to a Reuters survey. The June increase is well above average and bodes well for U.S. numbers. The unemployment rate now stands at 5.3%. Well, PayPal is going to buy digital money transfer company Xoom for a reported $890 million cash. Xoom, which lets people send money internationally via mobile phones and pay bills, charges $5 to $10 for the online service, depending on the size of that transfer. Along with the surcharge, the company keeps the exchange rate difference. Well, the move may prove lucrative for the famous PayPal brand. And finally, the Justice Department in the U.S. is investigating a possible price-fixing scheme that may involve a number of airlines. Now, the DOJ has called this a case of possible unlawful coordination, in which seats may have been limited and prices fixed. Though investigators refuse to name the airlines in question, 4 major airlines control 80% of the market in the United States. Well, Israel is well known for innovation in international circles, and now it is adding its high-tech offering, this time in the south, and I went to see for myself. In the middle of Israel's Negev desert, an oasis of cybersecurity innovation is blossoming. A number of factors, both local and global, have encouraged the development of this cyber tech center in Israel's largest southern city, Beersheba. A substantial transfer of IDF facilities to this desert hub has already attracted multinationals as they look to stay near the Army's tech-savvy workforce. Ben-Gurion University's fresh pool of talent and the foresight of some local pioneers are also reasons.
What we've seen about 4 years ago is that there is a whole new wave of cyber attacks coming to hit many of the federal agencies as well as the corporations out there, and we thought that's an excellent ecosystem to create a whole new set of companies in that space.
Israeli venture capital firm JVP first opened its Beersheba Cyber Labs office 2 years ago, well before other big names started to take notice of Israel's southern capital. Even a few years ago, camels were a common sight here, along stretches of dusty dirt roads, which now are buffered by shiny new centers filled with IT whizzes, defense buffs, and cyber innovators. Ronen Yehoshua, the CEO of Morphisec, works in the field of polymorphic defense, which he says would have prevented security breaches on companies like Target and Office Depot.
Hackers all the time improve the techniques. They build new types of attacks. The security measures try to understand what are those techniques. They build new mechanisms in order to defend against them, and the attackers learn them and again build a new type of attacks in order to overcome them. So this is a never-ending cycle.
Coronet specializes in the mobile phone and Wi-Fi space.
Everybody protects against the upper levels, the application operating system levels, and nobody is focusing on that world. And wherever there is a world that is unfocused, that's where the attackers go.
Still, Beersheva has long been an overlooked destination in Israel, locals often preferring the lush coastline with its lively nightlife. We're standing right here in the middle of the Negev desert, and all this cyber tech development that you can see right here behind me actually fits in right along with the government's plan to expand business and commerce outside of the center. Global tech companies are also fueling interest in Beersheva. EMC, Lockheed Martin, Oracle, and IBM have all opened up excellent centers here. And Beersheva is starting to see the same big exits traditionally seen in Tel Aviv. In March, eBay's PayPal bought startup Cyactive for $65 million. With a sum like that, it's hard not to take Beersheva seriously. Well, Gray's taking the spotlight in financial markets this week. For insight on what to expect, we are joined in studio by Eran Peleg of investment firm Clarity Capital. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, what is the likelihood now of a Greek exit from the Eurozone?
So we still believe it's fairly low. One has to understand, I mean, Greece already missed a payment to the IMF on 2 days ago, on the 30th of June, and it's actually likely that they might default. I mean, that payment miss does not constitute a formal default because it's private debt to a public institution. But the chances of a default have increased. We still have the referendum, which is coming up on Sunday, July 5th, but there is no direct link between those issues and the question of what will be the outcome on Sunday, or at least not a formal link between that and between a Greek exit from the Eurozone, which is a much more complicated process.
Right. Well, what would that impact have on the world economy?
So fairly modest. I mean, you have to understand Greece is share of global GDP is 0.3%. That's tiny, minimal. Most advanced economies, exports to Greece are very minimal. So at least from an economic perspective, the impact would be very low.
But wouldn't Europe feel a big shock from that?
So when it comes to the financial aspect or the financial fallout, potential fallout from a Greek situation, there are definitely risks. But a lot of things have changed over the last couple of years. So since 2011, say, when the whole Greek crisis broke out, a lot of the Greek debt has moved from the private sector to the public sector. Most of the Greek debt today is held by the IMF, by the ECB, by the European Commission. Therefore, these are public institutions that are much better positioned to. If we do see a significant loss on Greek debt, I mean, they're much better positioned to deal with those losses than if that debt was sitting with, say, commercial banks or with private investors. In addition to that, today the ECB is much better positioned to deal with any fallout, financial fallout from the situation. They have many more tools that they didn't have in place back in 2011. There's the OMT program. There's the quantitative easing program. Say, for example, already a couple months ago, they announced that they would be buying 1 trillion euros of sovereign debt in Europe over what remains now is 16 months. They can come out tomorrow morning if they need to and say, we're going to double this program to 2 trillion euros. And what they'll be doing is they'll be buying the sovereign debt of Italy and Portugal and so forth, and with that, stabilizing the situation. So, A, because the concentration of risk has, is much more, the concentration is much more with the public institutions, and B, because the ECB has many more tools, therefore, we think that the financial fallout probably can be contained.
Interesting. So this is just more on the public side rather than the private. But what about this upcoming referendum? What should market watchers really be looking for here?
Look, it does make a big difference whether the outcome is a yes or no at the end of the day. I think that if we get a no vote, then we're back to the negotiating table, because I mean at the moment, I mean theoretically, we've still had negotiations kind of going on the last couple of days, or at least there was some attempt to negotiate over the last couple of days. But Merkel has come out, I think whether it was yesterday or the day before, and said let's wait. let's talk after the referendum. So now we're waiting for the outcome. If the public says no, like what the Greek government is campaigning for, back to negotiations. If they say yes, then I think that opens up a lot of different scenarios, because then the Greek government would probably need to resign. And they've already said now today, Varoufakis, the finance minister, said today, I will resign. That was clear. I mean, he didn't have to say that, actually. It's quite clear that they cannot continue to serve as the government if they lose that vote. But then there are many other political scenarios that are opening up to us, and we'll have to assess them as they come along, I guess.
Indeed, it seems certainly like a wild card right now. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight here very much.
Thank you.
Moving on now to the rest of our coverage. England isn't known for its wine, but producers in the UK are now putting new fizz in British bubbly.
30 years ago, this used to be a pig farm, but global warming has helped bring wine growing to Sussex in the south of England. Bluebell Vineyard produces more than 40,000 bottles a year. The UK wine industry started in the 1990s and is now worth a corking £82 million.
English wine has really found its feet now. We've found that production has increased by over 100% in the last 7 years. We're growing and growing and growing, and the main reason for that is the production of sparkling wine, because we've proven over the last 15 years particularly that these wines can match the best in the world.
The chalk and limestone soil is very similar to some of the terrain in Champagne. Growers here have copied their French counterparts using the same grape varieties: Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay.
We need to hone in on that quality factor, make sure we produce the best that's out there that we can, and with the new vineyards coming online, making sure that they keep the quality up as well. There's no point in new vineyards coming online producing wine which are lower quality and therefore giving the UK a bad reputation.
This bubbly has won a number of awards over the past few years, including a gold medal at Decanter in 2014. Brits have come to appreciate local English wine in one of the top wine consumption markets in the world. But this success fizzles out abroad. Foreign consumers still need convincing that British wine can compete with the best.
Nobody wanted to try English wine, but if they did a blind tasting, they were all very surprised. They thought it was champagne.
As the industry grows, it's becoming more professional. New skills, training and technology have helped improve the quality of the wine. More than 6 million bottles are produced in the UK each year, but that's just a drop in the ocean compared to the 300 million bottles of champagne produced across the Channel.
And for the stories we didn't want you to miss, we are joined on set by Daniel Roth. Well, thanks for being with us right now. So what do you have for us today?
As usual these days, and for the days to come, we're talking Greece first. Gawker actually had this really interesting story by a journalist named Joshua Stevens, who's on the ground in Athens. And he's actually tapped into the underbelly of what's really going on. And since 2008, and this is something people don't really know or talk about outside of Greece, since 2008, when the crisis really hit hard and the country spun into a tailspin, there have been networks growing, neighborhood networks of democratically set up councils to provide everything that the country was not able to provide anymore.
These are underground networks.
They're semi-underground, but the thing is they include everyone from the local electrician to the local representative on the city council. It's not that they're underground or illegal or somehow seedy. They're simply sort of sitting under the surface, providing people with food, clothing, education, health services, all of the things that the government has been forced slowly and slowly since taking these bailout packages to cut more and more of. So this story is really looking at this amazing kind of bubbling up of democratically organized underground neighborhood councils providing all the things the governments are supposed to provide, which Greece has, for the last 5 or 7 years, been having more and more trouble providing.
Well, this is fascinating indeed, especially with Greece being the founding country for democracy here. But what else do you have for us?
So the next one, we're moving here to Israel, somewhere between Israel and Washington. You know, last week I reported that the State Department, that the U.S. is working on a trade deal with Europe, and in it they put a stipulation that there will be no boycotting of Israel by partner countries. Now, the State Department spun around and made it clear they're talking about the BDS movement, that they're talking about boycotts of Israel in total. When it comes to boycotts of settlements, the State Department said they're all for it, actually. They will not stop boycotts of settlements, only boycotts of Israel proper. Now, this came as a huge surprise to those pushing for it in the U.S. and those pushing for it in Israel, this stipulation in this trade package. And it really kind of spun everyone's heads on this trade deal.
Well, this was actually just a clarification, correct?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for your insight here. As always, Daniel Roth, our reporter. That wraps up our show today. Do join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, from the Jaffa Port in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching.